Okay, so we'll continue from where we left off a couple weeks ago. We're holding Kohelet, Perek Vav. We're starting the 6th chapter, and pretty much we're halfway through the book. Kohelet repeats himself a little bit. Many of the ideas come up again and again. After all, he's talking about the folly and the fallacies, the many mistakes people make, the lack of proper or correct focus in life. And it's a waste. Life is short, and if we don't learn the rules, then we miss out. There are many, many missed opportunities. There unfortunately is room for mistakes. And this is not just a book of the mistakes. And even though he does sound from time to time pessimistic and does sound in some ways depressed about all the vanities and all that happens in life, nevertheless, it's also a book of instruction, of a rebuke, in many ways similar to Mishlei, Proverbs, where he points out the right and the wrong. So, in reading through the various Pesukim, the various chapters, one hopefully gets the message, and that is what is important in life and what is not important, what is trivial and what should be a priority. In chapter 6, he begins to talk about the emphasis of life, what the emphasis should be. After all, he's pointed out that many of our efforts are not necessary. If it's part of one's Mazal, that he should be wealthy, then regardless how much efforts he makes, even if he makes very little effort, he will be rich. If it's not part of one's Mazal, then regardless of how much effort and time one invests in trying to become rich, it will not come to that. But beyond that, beyond one's efforts and beyond the concept of Mazal, he just talks about the whole concept of wealth. And how, as it was pointed out before, that sometimes wealth can be detrimental. It's not necessarily a blessing as many people think. So he moves away from the whole concept of Mazal now and importance of what people attribute importance to wealth, in pointing out how some people are so unlucky, even if they have what appears to be all the luck and all the money in the world. So, but before we begin chapter 6, I want to give a little bit of an introduction. Part of the reason why many people are confused, or one of the reasons why there is so much confusion in life, and when I say confusion, I mean a lack of understanding, or for a better word, that people are not always able to discern meaning to differentiate between right and wrong. One of the reasons for that is because most of us, almost all of us, don't see the entire picture. If you only see part of the picture, then you obviously don't know or don't understand everything there is to understand. And when we only see some details or some aspects of a situation, we could easily make a mistake, or we could easily have the wrong idea of what we're looking at. What are you looking at? Well, I think I'm looking at a camel, and it's not a camel after all. It's just a big cat or some other animal. Looking at a part of the picture is not the same, of course, as looking at the whole picture. And as a result of this, of course, this leads to confusion, or to not having the proper understanding of what is happening in life in general. If we would have the entire picture before us, if we would, of course, be able to see more, then we would have a better understanding. In other words, what you see many times in life is even people who are years more advanced in age, was older people who supposedly are more experienced, they've been around longer, are not too different than little children. Obviously, they're smarter, they perhaps possess more knowledge, they may be more mature and settled, but in many ways they're the same like little kids. In what way? In that little kids, to them, what differentiates good from bad is that which is painful is bad, in that which is sweet and pleasurable is good, right? That's the way a kid sees it. I mean, if he puts his fingers in the socket and he gets an electric shock, he'll realize that it's dangerous. He gets his hands in fire, he realizes that that's no good. And of course, you give him a candy and he has a good memory of the sweets, and he'll know, yes, that colorful wrapper, that little candy or whatever it is that he calls it, is definitely good. And it may be, of course, something that's not very good for his stomach. We know that. So older people who are supposed to be smarter are not necessarily smarter when it comes to certain areas of life because their judgment is faulty. They may think that something is good when it's really not good. They may think that something is bad. In reality, it's not so bad after all. They're not able to discern correctly, even though they're older in age. So that's, of course, as a result of not really knowing what is good and what is bad. So what is good and what is bad? It's a big question. If I ask you what's good, what is good to you may not be good to me. What's good to me may not be good to you. So what does that show? That good is relative. Does everybody understand what I mean by relative? It's something relative. What is good for me may not necessarily be good for you. But that's not the ultimate good. The ultimate good must be good for everyone. Otherwise it would be called good. Even though we say good is relative, when Hashem says good, He means good for the ultimate purpose. When does Hashem use the word good? In the beginning of creation. I mean, He uses it several times, of course. In the Torah, the word appears more than once. But in creating the world, Hashem says after creating just about everything that it's good. What do you mean it's good? We just said good is relative. No. If Hashem says something is good, it means it serves a purpose. Cockroaches, believe it or not, are good. The women may not think so. When they see one, they're afraid. They see a spider. It serves a purpose, otherwise it wouldn't have been created. Everything that's been created in the world serves a purpose. There's a need for it. We may not know the need. So what? Do we know everything? But if Hashem says after completing His creation that something is good, He's letting us know it serves a purpose. I created it for a reason. Good is also something that's complete. Something that is not lacking. It's good. Otherwise, if it's lacking, it would be defective and it's not so good. And of course, as we said, good is essential. There's a need for it. It serves a purpose, it's essential, and it's complete. At the end of creation, however, Hashem says after creating everything, that everything is tov me'od. And by the way, we've explained in the past, and I'll repeat again, that man is not good when he's created, right? Because it's what he makes of himself through his free will that will determine if he's good or not. And we're going to get back into it. But at the end of creation, Hashem says something very interesting, that everything is tov me'od. After everything is said and done, everything is very, very good. What is this coming to teach us? That something that's complete, the world in its complete form, is better than it's in separate parts. As Aristotle has been reputed as having said, that the whole is greater than the sum of all its parts. Have you heard of that saying? The whole is greater than the sum of all its parts. So all the parts are important. You add them all together, it's very good, very important. But the whole, something which is complete, is better, or greater, I should say, than the sum. In other words, that it may be more complete. There may be something better or greater to it than the individual parts put together. So even though the individual parts are important, they on their own, because they belong to a greater whole, a greater part, by themselves they may be okay, they may be good, but they're not as good as when they are together. So tov me'od, at the end of creation, says tov me'od, the world as a whole is greater than the sum of all of its parts. In other words, every part is important, but the world as a whole piece is definitely greater and more important. So something which is complete is more important, therefore, than something that is not complete. And, of course, what we learn from this is that something that is complete and good is what ultimately is when it serves a purpose, when it leads us to a goal, to a purpose in life. Otherwise, it doesn't really represent something good and complete. So the definition of good or completeness in something must be in relation to creation. Something is good is if it leads to the yi'ud, to the matara, to the goal. Otherwise, it's not necessarily good. So in judging if something is good in the eyes of Hashem, you ask yourself, is this purposeful? Is this constructive? Does this lead to God's plan or to God's blueprint, what He had in mind in building this world? After all, He's made us a partner. So that's how we can judge from the creation of the world what Hashem determines something is good. That is how we can determine if something is good and complete or worthwhile, worth our effort. Does it lead to the ultimate purpose of what the world was created for? For that, of course, one needs to know the creation, the purpose of creation of the world. Same thing, by the way, if a human being, because he consists of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, the evil inclination, so long as he has faults, so long as he has tendencies, or he's inclined to do that which is not right, he's incomplete. What makes a man more complete than another man is if he has mastered self-control in being able to rein in that which is bad. What's bad? That which is contrary to the purpose of creation. In the same way that good serves a purpose, bad, it opposes that purpose. So everything in the world which is contrary to the Torah, contrary, opposed to it. You can have things that are compatible, but they're not in the Torah, right? But that which is opposed to the law of the Torah, to the divine plan, goes against Hashem's wishes. It includes all the witchcraft in the world, all the impure forces, all the kohot hara, they're called the forces of evil. Hashem created them to allow for free will. They exist for a purpose too. What's that purpose? For that, to allow free will, just for that alone. If everything would be good and peaceful and quiet and easy and obvious, then where's the free will? So you see, that is the purpose of evil. That is the purpose why Hashem allows evil, corruption, and war, and selfishness, and all the terrible things that occur in the world. Is to people should think, well, where is God? Is there a God? How could He allow all these things? So this is part of Hashem's plan and design for the world, especially if we want to have really true free will. So man, in possessing the ability, of course, does not mean that he's bad, because it serves a purpose that he has the ability to choose between good and bad. What determines if he's good or bad, of course, is his conduct, his choices, the choices that he makes. And so long that he makes wrong choices, there's a lot of imperfection in him. He can continuously perfect himself, of course, by making the right choices and by refining his character. Refining his character meaning refining those areas in his personality, which we all have, that need repair or that need control. So the rabbis tell us that therefore, even something which is wrong, something which is bad, something that is opposed to Hashem, in some ways, you can control it in such a way that you can transform it to the service of Hashem. And that is why in the Kriyat Shema we say to love Hashem b'chol levavecha, with all your hearts. Hearts? It says levavecha plural. We only have one heart, unless you had a transplant maybe and you have, the two of them. We have one. What is two? B'chol levavecha, with your Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. How could you love Hashem with your Yetzer Hara, with the evil inclination? So the rabbis explain is that even if you do something which is physical for your own personal selfish benefit, to sleep and to eat, that's Yetzer Hara. Why is that Yetzer Hara? It's not Ra. It's called Ra because it's serving yourself much more than it's serving God. Nevertheless, if you do so, you eat, you sleep for the right reasons. I eat and sleep so I can be strong and have rested my body so that I can serve the Almighty. Then you're doing those things for the ultimate purpose, to serve God, to be a true soldier, to be a true servant. If you do it only for the pleasure or for ulterior motives, then obviously it remains Ra and remains opposed. What does it mean opposed? It means that it won't help you in your service of God. It may not kill you, but it of course will not be very helpful. The more one therefore does things in life, even though they're physical, even though they're for oneself, indirectly for oneself, but he adds this dimension, this divine or spiritual dimension to his earthly and physical activities, he transforms them into the service of Hashem, and therefore transforms them into something good. Good meaning serving the ultimate purpose, the ultimate cause of creation. Now, there are those who have a lot of good thoughts and good intentions. But that's all. That's where it ends. A lot of people I've heard telling me, Rabbi, I have a good Jewish heart. That doesn't mean anything. Do you do anything as a result of that good heart? You have good thoughts, good intentions, but do you practice what you preach? Do you put it to work? That's called deeds. You say, oh, no, it's enough that I have a Jewish heart. It's not enough. Judaism requires maasim, requires deeds. The deeds are good for us. The deeds are the ones that refine us, that transform us into being good people. So you're doing a disservice to yourself if all you do is believe or have the intentions, but you don't carry out, don't realize or put to work all those good thoughts. Torah therefore dictates to us certain deeds, certain maasim, not only for the reward, not only for us to acquire our ticket to Olam Haba, to the world to come, but in order to achieve what we need to achieve in this world, it requires maasim. This is according to the Kabbalah, the Olam HaAsiyah, the world of action. So we don't remain static. It's not enough just to remain a good person. We have to interact with people. We're not like the non-Jewish world who, depending on the religion, they have priests that try to abstain from any physical intimacy with a woman. That goes against God's plan of getting married, having children. And that involves a physical act. Yes, a physical act is unsacred. No, it can be sacred. It can be holy if you use it properly. If you do it for the real reasons, not for selfish reasons like unfortunately a great part of the world today is doing, and what Hollywood is trying to sell, right? So something as physical as intimacy between a husband and wife can be something very, very holy. As we said before, even with Yetzer Hara, that's what you want for yourself. But you conducted yourself in such a way that is geared towards Avodat Hashem, serve Hashem, then even that which is physical becomes holy. And that is how we are serving Hashem, bechol levavecha, with all our heart, meaning even with the Yetzer Hara. In talking about good or goodness, we're actually not saying that this concept of goodness only relates or only involves religion, or that which is divine and spiritual necessarily. Even though we did say before goodness is something that serves the ultimate purpose, it's not necessarily tied to a religion or to religion altogether. There are many people in this world who have no religion, who don't even know that God exists, but they're good people, and they do good things. There was once a doctor who treated the Chafetz Chaim, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, great rabbi, and after treating him, he asked the rabbi, does somebody like me also have a share to the world to come in the way I do what I do? In other words, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a learned man, maybe perhaps he doesn't do that many mitzvot either. Does somebody like him also have a share to the world to come? And the rabbi said, of course. And he told him the story of a great doctor during the time of the Gemara, that his name was Abba, I believe, who used to receive greetings from heaven every day. Can you imagine? Greetings, I guess through dreams, he was told, you're a good man. And what did he do? So the rabbis tell us in the Gemara that he conducted himself in a very, very righteous way as a doctor. For example, when he treated women, he would be very, very modest and careful not to just gaze at them in a wrong way. He would put a mask on. He would separate between men and women. He had a little box outside of the entrance of his office for people to put the payment in it. He did not want to embarrass the poor and those who did not have money, so he left Whoever paid, paid. Whoever did not pay, did not pay. And number 3, when a Talmid Chacham, a student who was learning Torah, would come and be treated, he wouldn't even charge him. On the contrary, he would give him money to buy food and clothing, whatever he needed. So he was a very, very special man. So if he can receive greetings from heaven, you can understand from that even though all he was a doctor, the same thing with anyone else, regardless of his profession, you can be a great man. And the Chafetz Chaim went on to explain that we learned this from the tree of life. Where was the Etz HaChaim? It was be'emtza Hagan. It was in the middle of the Garden of Eden, not in the corner. What does that represent? Being in the middle of something. In the middle of the garden is indicative of the fact that you can reach it from every direction. When something is in the middle, you can reach it from every direction. So Olam Haba can be reached from various directions, not only through being a rabbi or through being a scholarly, religious Jew. Obviously, it's important to learn the Torah and to perform the mitzvot and to be careful with the averot. But the way to Olam Haba can be attained through various directions. It's not necessarily only one direction. So that's why I made this point that of Tov not necessarily really being related to a religion. There are a lot of good people in this world, I hope a lot, that are good and righteous, and they're doing good things, or even though they may not be doing a lot of good, they may be doing some good. And that some good somehow contributes to the ultimate purpose of life, to the real reason why God created the world. So one has to be very careful with looking down or being disrespectful of others who may not agree with his way or his philosophy of life. So, people are different, but they're all created in the image of Hashem, the image of God, and they can all be good people, and nice people, righteous individuals, each one in their own way. In the end, what determines if a person is good or not, we will be seeing that very, very soon. That Solomon will point out that it's only at the end of one's life where one can see and look back at what he has accomplished. Not when the baby's born and everybody's so happy and rejoicing and the baby's so cute and he looks like the father and looks like the mother. All of that is so unimportant because this little baby can eventually become a monster. How do you know? Yeah, how do you know? All babies are almost the same. They're all cute, smile, and we're happy when they're born. But will we be happy with this little baby? Time will tell. When you go to the funeral of this individual and he's eulogized, you may have a better idea of what this man or woman was, not when they were born. So that's what Solomon will tell us eventually, soon. The Tov Yom HaMavet Mi Yom Hivaledo, that it's better on the day of death than the day of one's birth, because the day of death will tell us what this man or woman did with their time, with their life. Then we will know if there's reason to rejoice or not. Before we begin the Perek Vav, another little point that is important to keep in mind always is that circumstances are not the ones that are going to determine our life. There are all kinds of circumstances. I think you'll understand what I mean by circumstances. There's ups and downs in life, all kinds of things that happen. And they on their own do not determine the kind or quality of life. What ultimately determines and is a deciding factor is our reactions, how we deal with the situation. Terrible things happen. I don't even want to call them terrible because there's not, things that are bitter. Because there's nothing bad. Everything is good, right? Everything is for a reason. But some people have a hard life. There are many struggles, many ups and downs in life. But it's not the circumstances that surround us in life from the beginning to the end that matter so much as how we deal with them, how we react with them. Somebody yells at you. What are you going to do about it? Somebody stole money from you. How are you going to react? You have a difficult child, a difficult boss, a difficult employee, difficult neighbor, difficult relative, friend, or gentleman in the shul who's giving you a hard time. How are you going to deal with him? So it's not the circumstances that are that significant. It is always going to be how we relate to them, how we deal with them, how we react to them. That's ultimately our challenge. That is how we're being tested. And we're being tested all the time, in different ways. Somebody can come up to you. You have a quarter to spare? I'm sure you've heard that line before. Well, that's not a big deal. You give him a quarter. What if he asks you for $1? Well, you may not give it so fast, right? What if it's an old woman who needs to cross the street? You're next to her. Somebody else, let somebody else do it, you might say. We're always being tested. I mean, you can give somebody a ride and you don't want to, because whatever. You can help someone. You can say a kind word. You can give some encouragement. We're always being tested, whether it's at home or at work, everywhere, on how we react, how we interact with people, what we say, what we do. This is ultimately what will the determining factor of whether we succeeded in life or not. Now, Shlomo Melech is about to tell us about something that he considers terrible, bad, something which is totally depressing, something which is very painful, and something which is unfortunately seen from time to time, quite often actually, he says. That's the beginning of Perek Vav. Yesh ra'a asher ra'iti tachat hashamesh v'raba hi al adam. There's something bad that I've seen under the sun, something that I have observed that is really not good. And it happens quite often. Ish asher yiten lo Elohim osher u'nechasim v'chavod ve'eneno haser lenafsho mikol asher yitaveh. God has given an individual tremendous wealth, properties, honors, and nothing. He's not lacking nothing from all that he desires. But guess what? God does not enable him to enjoy all that he has acquired. Why? Because in the end, he will die. And what will happen to all the money? His wife's second husband will inherit it all. In other words, his wife may remarry, and guess what? All the hard work and all the money that he saved up will go to a guy who never worked for it. What do you think about that? He says, Zeh hebel v'choli ra'hu. He says, you know what I call this? Shlomo Melech says it. This is so vain. This is so sick. This is so painful. He calls it a choli ra, a sickness. A choli ra meaning it's unbearable. It's difficult. It's painful. Frustrating. Isn't it? Yeah. Guy who works so hard, he wants to enjoy his money, well, he dies. And who gets the money? The second husband of his wife, of all people. Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, which is a very important commentary on the Torah, and of course on the whole Nach and the Ktuvim here, says that the reason this can happen, why Hashem would allow a person to earn it and not enjoy it, is because of some sin, some averah, some transgression. That this individual was extremely selfish, perhaps, or did something terribly wrong with his money, did not use it properly. Hashem says, well, you don't deserve it then. It doesn't happen to everyone, and there's a lot of people who make a lot of money, don't give to the poor, not charitable, and of course, they live a long life, they have the money for many, many years. It doesn't mean it happens to all. But this does happen, that Hashem does not enable the individual who was stingy or who did not make proper use of his money to enjoy all his money, to enjoy the money that he worked so hard. And he continues on to explain, Im yolid ish me'ah v'shanim rabot yichyeh, even if you were to give birth to 100 kids and live for many years, v'rav shiyu yimeshna, no matter how long his life is, nafsho lo tizba min hatova, his nefesh, his spirit, will never be able to enjoy all the good. V'gam kevura lo eta lo, and he may not even earn his right to be buried, which I'm going to explain to what that means. After seeing all of that, Shlomo HaMelech says, Amarti tov mimenu hanafel. The miscarried child is better off than him. Miscarried child called nefil. So he's saying here two things. Even if somebody were to live for many, many years, and you give him all the money in the world, and he had many kids, all that good he may not end up enjoying. That's one interpretation. The second interpretation is that some people complain, if I only had the time, if I only had the money, I would do this. Shlomo HaMelech says, the bottom line is he has seen that no matter what people say, even if you gave them all the money, even if you let them live 200 years, 300 years, they will still repeat the same mistakes. It's not true. In Yiddish, I just heard recently, there's a very beautiful saying, when it comes to helping others, not the one who has gives, the one who wants to gives. It's not having that brings about the interest of giving. It's giving to begin with, even if you don't have that much. So it's not the one who has that gives, it's the one who wants to that ends up giving. So here, even if you were to give man all the ability, all the wealth, the fortune in the world, and the amount of time necessary, he would not necessarily do the right thing. That's usually just a bad excuse. It doesn't mean anything. But what he says here that's interesting is that even kevura, he may not even be buried. Now that's very interesting. And I'm not really sure why he puts it into the same pasuk, the same verse. Gam kevura lo hayta lo. He's just trying to tell us, on a very simple level here, that even if a person has all the good in the world, he may not even merit the bare minimum of what even certain animals are given. There is a dog cemetery, right? Even the bare minimum, a burial, a Jewish burial. Now, a Jewish burial is a zchut. It is a merit. There are people who drown at sea. There are people who are lost and we cannot find. There are people that are eaten by animals that don't receive a kibura. Tell you a story that happened in Mexico in the 1980s. You may have remembered. It's been a while. There was a Mexican airline that exploded in mid-air on its way to Guadalajara. I think it was actually headed for Los Angeles, but with a stop in Guadalajara, for Mexico City. Everybody on board was killed, of course. Anyway, the problem now is to recover the bodies. There was a Jewish woman and her child on the plane. And of course, it was very sad for the Jewish community. So let's bury them, bring them to a Jewish burial. But they can't find the bodies. The bodies are scattered, maybe parts, who knows. So what do? You search. One night, the lady who was on board the plane came in a dream to her neighbor. In Mexico, many people live in the same building, these condominiums. So she came in a dream to her neighbor in the building. And she tells the neighbor, they will not be able to find my body or the body of my child until they check the mezuzot in the house. So a friend of mine was called, a friend of mine who checks mezuzot, and 2 mezuzot were found to be not kosher. The one in the entrance of the kitchen, the other one I think to the living room. And what was the problem with the mezuzot? The letters, L'ma'an yirbu yemechem v'imei benechem, in order that your life and the life of your children should be lengthened, were missing. Some of the letters were missing of that very verse that discusses the length of life of one and the length of life of one's children. L'ma'an yirbu yemechem v'imei benechem, herself and her child. As soon as those mezuzot were replaced with kosher mezuzot, a phone call came in from Mexicana Airlines, I think it was Mexicana. The body of this woman and the child have been found. And they were given proper burial. It was a big funeral. And an incredible Kiddush Hashem, of course. The whole story. How? She was given permission, by the way. That's also, you need permission to come in a dream. You just can't come into someone's dream. You need permission for that. So she was given permission. Apparently because she had some other merit. Maybe she was careful, it's not her fault. She did pay for the mezuzot, something happened, who knows? You got to check your mezuzot from time to time, at least twice every 7 years. And you see, not only the protection of the mezuzah, the merit of the mezuzah, and in this case, the importance of the Jewish burial, at least to be brought into a Jewish cemetery. All right. The next interesting point in this pasuk is that he says that the nefil is better off than this guy. This guy may have had a lot of fortune, a lot of money, didn't get to benefit. The nefil, the miscarried fetus or child, is better off. What does that have to do with anything? Well, the nefil never got to see the world, never got to see the good or the bad, never got to see the difference of anything. So he doesn't miss out, he's not in pain. The one who did acquire, and doesn't get to enjoy or benefit from it, obviously he's very distressed. So what's better than this guy is a nefil, a miscarried child who didn't even enter this world. And therefore he's not pained at all, didn't lose out anything. A nefil is better than him. The second pirush really to this whole concept of why the nefil is better than him continues on in the next pasuk. The next pasuk says, "Ki bahevel ba u'bachoshech yilech u'bachoshech shemo yechuseh." Because this miscarried child came bahevel, came into nothing, and went into darkness, and in darkness his name will be covered. In other words, he may not have been given a name, and even if he was born, but he was born, I forget the term for it, when they're not, stillborn, yes, stillborn. In other words, he was born dead. They give him a brit milah, according to the halacha, at the burial site. And they give him a name, even though he was born stillborn, or was not alive. So that he should have a chelik l'olam haba. That's the custom. We're talking about a complete child, not flesh. So they give him a name. So, in that name it will be completely forgotten because he has no life, no real life that people will remember him. This individual, therefore, who has not achieved anything good in life, anything constructive, will also be similar to a nefil who has come into nothing and into darkness, and his name will be covered up and forgotten. What has he done? Think of Thomas Edison. I mean, even though this may not be the best example, but you have a lot of individuals who have contributed to this world. Remember what we said in it before? You don't have to be of a certain religion to be good. There are individuals in this world who have contributed something to this world, to creation, to humanity. Right? You don't have to necessarily be part of any religion. But this individual who all he has done is acquired wealth, made money, and involved himself in all these vain things, when he leaves, when he departs this world, regardless of the age, Shemo Yechuseh, his name will be extinguished, it will be covered up. Nothing has been done. What has he done? Unless, of course, he did something for the betterment of humanity. I mentioned Thomas Edison, and of course Thomas Jefferson. Not only was he one of the presidents of the United States, he was an inventor, and he actually contributed in many ways, not only to the formation, establishment of this country and the many laws. There are many things that he designed and invented. And there are others, quite a few, who have done something for humanity. This individual has done nothing. So therefore, Shlomo Melech compares him to a nefil, and says that a nefil is even better than him. Nefil meaning this stillborn child or this miscarried fetus, because at least he didn't go through life, is not pained by everything. This man is a neshama who has lived through his life. When he looks back, he says, what a waste of my time, what a waste of a life. I could have done so much with the hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars that Hashem gave him. All he did was accumulate and leave it to someone else. to enjoy. He says, what do you call that if not hevel v'holira? And the next pasuk is interesting. He says, Gam shemesh lo ra'a v'lo yada nachat lazeh mizeh. He did not even see the sun and was not able to tell the difference between this or that. It's talking about the nefil. That's the simple interpretation of this pasuk. A nefil, a miscarried child, does not see the sun. So that's a simple translation of the words Gam shemesh lo ra'a. But he's referring to, according to the deeper meaning of this pasuk, to the light of the Torah. Without the light of the Torah, there's no way that one can know the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. Who's to say? Who's to say something is right or something is wrong? Unless, of course, we base our opinions on what the Torah says. That tells us, listen, this goes against the purpose of creation, and this is compatible. Without direction of the Torah, that we do not know. So here Shemesh is telling us that this individual would have made all the mistakes possible, or not have achieved anything, only because Gam Shemesh lo ra'a, he did not learn the Torah. The next pasuk, Vilo chaya elef shanim pa'amayim, even if you were to live 2,000 years, 1,000 years twice, v'tova lo ra'a, he would not see any good. Everything goes to one place. So here there are basically two statements being said in this pasuk. Even if you gave man thousands of years, like we said earlier, even if he had all the time and all the money, he would not necessarily do the right thing. The best proof, by the way, is from where? From the Dor HaMabul. You know, it's interesting, when people learn for the first time Parshat Bereshit, Noah said, wow, these people lived for 800, 900 years. What did they do with all those years? Could you imagine? Social Security would be broke a long, long time ago, with hundreds of years. Metushelach, 969 years. You wondered, wasn't he bored? What are you doing? They worked. They were physically active. And they were, some of them, of course, did something with their time, but many of them didn't. The vast majority of them didn't. Why do you think, all of a sudden, after the Mabul, little by little, if you look at the Torah, the age of the individuals becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, until the maximum approximately is 120. Even though some people live beyond 120, some people, of course, less, and it's not even the average. It's almost, for the most part, usually the maximum. What's going on? Hashem says, their heart and mind, a whole day, is just on satisfying their bodily needs, just on doing bad. Torah calls it bad. His yetzer, his thoughts, his desires and wishes are only bad. What's bad? I mean, only thinking of himself. Doesn't think about me, doesn't think about the world. What am I doing here? What am I supposed to do? Enjoy, you only live once, and all kinds of ideas like that. So from that story of the Mabul, from the story of Sefer Bereshit, from the story at the very beginning of creation, we actually see that Hashem is pointing this out, what he says right here. Even if I gave you all the time in the world, many, many human beings, the vast majority perhaps, would still be involved in gratifying themselves. Just as the generation of the Mabul of the flood did. Not preoccupied in doing what the ultimate purpose of creation is supposed to be. And then even if man were to have all the time, still, and all the money, what would happen? In the end, he doesn't get to keep it. Nevertheless, the bottom line is that even if Hashem says, if I were to give it to you, not only will you misuse it, abuse it, and not do the right thing with it, remember that you don't really get to keep it forever. You don't get to enjoy it forever. Everybody goes to the same place. It's called the kever, it's called the grave, it's called the ground. So in the end, why would you want to have it anyway? So he tells us that even if a person does have it, and he thinks he's enjoying it, in the end, it's all going to the same place. So this is not the real world. This is not what we're here for. This is ultimately a means for us to get somewhere else. There's another world. And most people are not aware of that, unless, of course, they learn, which is going to lead us to another idea, which I want to finish with today, because the next pasuk already begins to speak about something else. The idea is as follows. What is missing? We started off tonight's lecture by talking about the confusion, the lack of clarity and understanding of what is good and what is bad. People do not have the tools to be able to discern. Even though the Torah does help us to discern, not everybody has access to the Torah, not everybody wants to learn the Torah. The best way to relate to this is, I think, through eyeglasses. Imagine somebody that has nearsightedness. He's nearsighted. And his nearsightedness is, if you understand about numbers, is a number 8. Well, let's take actually a number 5 or 6 better, because number 8 you can't see almost anything. But let's see, I don't know how many of you know about the numbers. You know, if you have glasses, I think you know that there's 1, 2, 3, 4. They use numbers to describe the weakness of the eyes, of how much you can see from a distance of 20 feet, I think it is. So the higher the number, the less one can see in detail. You can see things, or you can see something, but you can't see in detail. So imagine somebody who has a 5 or 6, who's never put on eyeglasses. And all of a sudden you give him eyeglasses. What will be his reaction? Wow. All this exists? I didn't realize that's the way things look like, at least from a distance. All of a sudden everything comes into focus. All of a sudden everything becomes sharp and crispy. This man, because he did not have eyeglasses, has been missing out. You know that kids who need eyeglasses, if they don't have them while they're in school, they can't read the blackboard from a distance. And they suffer as a result. Especially if they're straining themselves to see. After all, they're told there are numbers out there. So that's after being told that there's numbers. But people are not being told there is something. They just go around as though, whatever it is that they see, they see. Whatever it is that they don't see, they don't see. But you can't drive a car without being able to see well, because then you can't read the signs. There's a lot of written text that you have to pay attention to. So they won't give you a driver's license if you cannot see, and you don't have your glasses, your contacts on you. In life, there's a lot of things that we have to look out for, that we have to observe. Shlomo Melech is telling us this. All this is an observer, analyzed. He's of course knowledgeable in Torah too. He's knowledgeable in Kabbalah and everything. And he's sharing with us a lot of information. And he's telling us that if you don't know this, or part of this, we're not going to be like him, but if you don't know a little bit of the basics, you're not wearing your eyeglasses, you can't, it's impossible for one to be able to discern right from wrong, good from bad. That is why the Rambam, in describing how Avodah Zarah, idol worship, began, a very fascinating development in the history of the world, and how Avodah Zarah began. In the beginning, everybody believed that God created the world. What happened? How did they move away from that concept? How did we get into idol worshiping? Atheism. And even though there may be other explanations too, depending on which part of history we're talking about, but the Rambam is talking about the very beginning, the moving away from the belief in God. It says, happened as a result of a mistake. It says, B'dor enosh ta'u b'nei ha'adam. They made a mistake. What was the mistake? He says, they basically believed in the very beginning that one had to worship the stars, because the stars are servants of God. And the same way we worship God, we've got to also worship His servants. Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, they're important too. You give them respect. But they lost track of the master, and they only remained with the servants. So by moving away and forgetting about the master, all that remained was the servants, the stars, which were, of course, and are influential in some ways, but they get all their power from the big boss. They get the power from Hashem. They don't act independently of God. So even though they're part of creation, it is true that stars have some influence over Earth and over us, the human beings. They don't have their own power. And they're not to be worshipped either. The Torah is against that, in order that we don't forget who is the source of everything. So this is a mistake that happened in the very beginning, but what happens as a result of this mistake? It's one thing if one makes a mistake, but it's another if this mistake is carried over several generations. Imagine a father, a son, a grandson, all thinking, oh, this is the way to go. So that's what's terrible here, is that this mistake continued on. Until when? This mistake continued on not only to affect several generations, it messed up people's lives, because people's lives were wasted in worshiping rocks. Even though the rock was symbolic of a higher force, but here we're talking about several generations of people's effort, time, and money being wasted on things that are silly, things that don't matter, things that are not important, and totally contrary to Hashem's design and plan for the world. Until when? When did this all stop, at least temporarily? Till who came to the scene? Avraham Avinu. So Avraham Avinu comes to the scene and tries to make a revolution. He does not succeed in changing the entire world, but he succeeds in converting and convincing a few individuals, hey guys, stop. You're making a big mistake. There is a creator to the world, there is a plan, there is a design, there's a purpose to all of this. And you guys are crazy. You're involved in something so useless, so silly, so wrong, so contrary to everything. It makes no sense, it's illogical, and it's of course against God's wishes. And of course he starts teaching the world that this God is an all-benevolent God, and that's what he does. He teaches kindness, he teaches the importance of blessings and giving thanks to the Almighty, and the importance of connecting to this God and praying to God as well. Not worshiping, all these idols that cannot really do anything. But this folly or these fallacies in people's minds, in many ways, was retained or inherited from their previous generation, so they didn't think too much about it. It's one thing when you think, and you're given the opportunity to decide, and you make your own decision. Okay, I think this is good, this is wrong, this is good. These guys were not even given the opportunity to think, to evaluate. They just took the traditions of their parents. And that is why the Rambam tells us that our emunah, the importance of our faith, is not just to believe blindly, even though we do believe certain things without necessarily having the proof for them. Our faith is unshaken by anything, but we are supposed to, from time to time, reinforce our faith through knowledge. Knowledge that what we know to be true is a fact. How do we do that? By convincing ourselves through observation of the universe, and by doing what Avraham Avinu did, thinking. Stop to think. Now, this is something, of course, that not many people do. They don't think enough. They don't evaluate. And I'm not saying, Chaz v'shalom, God forbid, that a Jew should question. We don't question the past. We know that they were smarter than us. We know that if they were willing to sacrifice their life for what they believed, that means it was true. And of course, we have a tremendous amount of evidence that everything that we believe in is 100% true. But even though we believe it with all our hearts and mind, the Rambam and the Sefer Chovat HaLevavot are of the opinion that it is a good thing, it is a healthy thing for every Jew to think about the truths, so that he convince himself, so that he be 100% confident and sure in these things, so that he should have clarity in the same way that Avraham Avinu had. And that is the most important lesson of Avraham Avinu, I believe. Avraham Avinu was not only communicating to the world, hey guys, some news, there is a creator, all of this is silliness. Not only is there a creator, there's a design and a plan, a purpose for all this life. This is what he expects of us. We know what his real message to humanity is. If I can do it, you can do it. Avraham Avinu said, if I, as a young child, according to the Midrash, as a young child, a young boy, was able to stop and realize this, it's only because I began to think independently. It's only because I began to evaluate the majesty of this universe, to look at it, to observe it, and to think about it. And to not just accept things the way they are. Yes, we do accept what our forefathers have told us, but we also have the ability and the obligation, the duty, to think about these things, so we can reinforce our emunah in this area. This is a very, very important idea that Shlomo Melech, of course, is saying is lacking, that human beings do not do enough, is that they don't think. And Avraham Avinu's message to the world is, if you begin to think, and you begin to evaluate and compare and analyze the creation and its purpose, you will reach the same conclusion that he did. And of course, what that means is that you will be able to tell right from wrong, good from bad. And this is what emet is all about, the truth. There's only one truth. It's not like many Israelis say, Kol echad v'emet shelo, everyone with his own truth. There can't be everyone with his own truth. Truth means there's only one. This is true, and this is false. Truth is similar to the definition of good. That which is ultimately the purpose of life. What serves the purpose, what goes along with it, is the emet. What goes against it is not. So is there a design? Is there a purpose? Once we agree with this initial and essential point that there is a creator and there is a design and a purpose in life, then all that is left for us to figure out, well, what is the purpose? And how do I go about doing what is expected of me? Many people, of course, have not reached that point because they have not even gotten to step one. Is there a creator in the world? They try to avoid it. Oh, no, I can't. They know that once they believe there's a creator, it will compel them. Well, if there's a creator, then he obviously created the world for a purpose. Then what does he want of me? You see how people try to shy away from this. They would rather not deal with it. And therefore, that is the weakness that over time people had with believing in idols. Believing, of course, there's a supreme force out there. But he doesn't demand anything of us. Live your life the way you want. Do what you want, enjoy it. You only live once. Eat, enjoy, But obviously that is not the real purpose of life. We see that this kind of behavior and belief has been destructive because it's selfishness, which has led to war, it leads to divorce, it leads to all kinds of problems. So we know that this cannot be right. But people don't want to admit it, right? People, of course, have a very powerful Yetzer Hara, which is also part of creation, to move them away from that belief. So it is up to the neshama, the divine spark in every human being, to awaken, to stop and think. And by doing so, we are assured that every human being, no matter where he comes from, can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Will be able to discern that there's something out there. And that something, of course, is the purpose of life, the meaning to all this creation. And once we embark on the road of seeing the meaning of life, then of course it will help us control our desires. It will help us remove all the vanities. It will help us see things differently, react differently, and of course engage in the proper behavior. But unfortunately, people are too busy with themselves, trying to enjoy themselves, buying the latest car, remodeling their kitchens, doing all kinds of things that don't relate to the real important question of what does he want me to accomplish? And it's not making lots of money. That's not it. That's not what he wants us to accomplish. But people want to compete with the Jones. I think that's what they say in this country.
Keep up with the Jones.
What is that? Keep up. Yeah. If you follow the trend and you follow the style and you become a slave of fashion, and all that, then obviously you're not able to think for yourself. And that's what Shlomo Melech wants us to do, is of course to realize some of the points that he's bringing here and sharing with us that are very much emphasized in the Torah. Plus, be an observer. Learn from experience. Don't repeat the mistakes others have made. Because after all, life is short. Before you know it, it's all over. And it will be a waste for not having done the right thing. So Hashem has endowed every human being with the tools, with the mental abilities, to be able to see right from wrong, as long as, however, he allows himself, he's fair with himself, and he, of course, borrows from the well springs of Chokhmah, the well springs of Torah, which, of course, without it, one does not have the chance of seeing the truth. One is able, however, even without the Torah, through our subconscious mind, the neshama, like Avraham Avinu, to be able to tell on the basic level that there's a creator in the world. That, yes, but to actually figure out the details of all that He wants of us, what's right, that one needs to see the Torah, the manual of instructions. And that is, of course, what he points out, is that is a much better investment of our time and efforts to pursue that chokhmah, that wisdom, in order that we should have a more successful life, in order that we should be able to reach our ultimate tachlit, our ultimate purpose that every individual has, his own unique mission in life. People, of course, fail in that mission only because they are involved in themselves. Instead of asking, like Kennedy says, don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. The nice thing about those words is that it contains a certain grain of truth as it relates to man's role in creation. Don't ask what can be done for you, ask what you can do. What do you need to do? What do we need to do to ultimately fulfill our mission? We're here for some mission, otherwise, what are we here for? Not for enjoyment, not for picnic. It doesn't make sense. But it does, people think like that because, they don't have any other way of thinking. So they are going or following a lifestyle of mistake in the same way their forefathers did. But as Jews, of course, we have the advantage of being able to draw from this great amount of chokhmah that is part of our heritage. You don't have to, and somebody who's not Jewish has to go borrow the Bible, has to look at that. But even without the Bible, there are many, many people out there, of course, who understand this at the very, very basic level, that human decency, being a human being as opposed to an animal, calls for being good and being kind and being, just and fair. That's at the very, very basic level. But of course, that's not enough. As we said before, it requires actions, it requires deeds, it requires continuous character refinement, and this can only be gotten through from the Torah. Even with the Torah, we still have all the struggles of the Yetzer Hara, who's trying to defeat us and tries to make us fail along the way, even after we recognize all the good. Imagine we still have this battle to fight. But the very first step is recognizing, hey, this is the truth. This is what's important. This is what is a priority, and therefore this is where we should spend most of our time pursuing. Thank you.